This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien kicks off today's show with a grain market outlook. He says where harvest is for Kansas and how last week's crop production report has impacted the markets this week. Keeping the show going is the keynote speaker at K-State Swine Day, Wayne Cast, as he discusses how he has seen the swine industry change in his life and career as a swine nutritionist. Chip Redmond, K-State meteorologist, finishes the show with a weather update. He says that people in Kansas should be starting to feel cooler temperatures. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show with a grain market update. And as always, we're joined with K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
Dan, kicking off our conversation, as we always do with the grain market, what are futures looking like?
Well, for corn and for wheat, they look about like they have been the last several weeks. I know corn growers that have either harvested the crop or just about ready to close things out are probably anxious or hopeful of seeing higher prices than we have been seeing. Corn closed yesterday, actually 4 cents higher at Dees corn at 474 3/4. Interesting when you look a year out, that Dees contract's up to 515 and 3/4. So again, the market right now, if you ask it, where are we at right now? Where's it next year? Well, not quite as overburdening a set of supplies as we've got right now. And when you look at a situation like this where we're kind of bouncing sideways at low levels, you start paying attention to charts. What's the resistance? What do we need to watch for if we were to go lower? You had the Dees contract within the last week and a half had set a low at about 460. Again, closed at 474 and 3/4, about 475 yesterday. So that, at least until further notice, we're kind of in that mode. We're watching 460, 450, something like that for lows. I'm sure farmers that aren't driven by cash flow needs are probably holding grain right now. And if anything, that's probably holding up this price. Of course, we're on the calendar for corn. We've got tax management before December 31st and what happens right afterwards. So that's, experienced farmers that are storing grain would like to delay income till the next year. I'm sure they're aware of that they're not the only ones doing that, and that could affect the cash market after the first. So we're into those modes right now. So we got that happening for corn. Wheat doing just about the same thing. Of course, the wheat harvest was way back in the middle of the year in late June, July. And the prices yesterday, 627 1/4, basically closed right down to the historic low for the Dees 23 contract. Also closed at 627 and 1/4. And it's a long story that we've been talking about with regard to why it's trading there. But point is that if people still have unsold wheat and they've held up to this point, unless they have cash flow needs or some tax management issues, they're probably holding for a bit now. Some of that wheat in past years, farmers that sell their wheat, grain elevators, co-ops, et cetera, would buy that wheat and put it into storage for the long term. And that may be what's going on. We'll have to look at the next stocks reports that come out to see what the percentage, if those percentages of on-farm versus off-farm are changing any. But right now, again, wheat's come down to these levels, bouncing right at the bottom. If we do go lower, then we're breaking new territory, and all that much more to think about, worry about. Although I'd come back and just reiterate that if people are still holding wheat now, they're not probably driven by cash flow needs. They're into longer term storage, and so they're going to probably weather this. That'd be my thought. Then for soybeans closed yesterday. The January contract, and we're in the November 23 contract's gone off the board now. The lead contract's January, so that's what elevators are pricing off of. That's what our basis is figured off of. Closed at 1360 and a half, and that all that's happening in soybeans really brings us into all the weather uncertainty issues going on in Brazil. Again, it has been too dry in the central and north, too wet in the south, pretty wet in Argentina, but that's caused replanting issues. Again, the ag market press is sort of all over that, talking about the percent replanted and what that will do to the crop. So here yesterday we had that January contract closed down 24 3/4 cents, almost 25. And as you and I were talking before we came on there, it's a sizable change, but really when you're at such lofty price levels like 13.60, 13.70 thereabouts, it's as a percentage change, it's almost just the static. But it does seem like that the forecast for rainfall to come into those areas that the market's watching is looking for rains to come in pretty steadily after Sunday. Well, so the market's selling the rumor. We'll see what the fact is. So if anybody holding soybeans and is looking for signals of when to take action, it's good for them to be watchful of what's coming in now, heading into this weekend and on into that Thanksgiving week. So we shall see. If the rainfall doesn't come to the degree that that's stated, then that's going to be interpreted pretty optimistically, pretty bullishly in terms of prices. So we'll watch and see. So I guess you stand back and look at it, and if there's anything happening right now in the market, it has to do with weather in South America. And that weather, we talked about the soybean market, it would have the potential to impact the corn market eventually for the second crop of corn, and some of that's already being planted. So we'll see how the longer term works itself out. But if I guess we stand back and look, it's only November. It's about Thanksgiving. We're already wondering about weather markets in South America. So that's a big thing. We've had the ongoing soybean export movement. Latest week showed about 73 million bushels shipped. That's over the USDA's pace of about 30 million on average each week to get through. But of course, we've got kind of a limited either 4 to 6 month time window when the U.S. has this business before the next South American crop comes in. So you got that going on, and have had support in the soybean market from soybean meal market positivity and soybean oil usage in the U.S. Again, renewable fuels, renewable diesel, biodiesel, both coming into play. They're not exactly the same thing. So you've got crush coming on pretty well, et cetera. So positive things going on in the soybean market, which eventually could affect the corn market, but and wheat just sort of again affected by a whole host of international, financial, and geopolitical challenges that are hurting us right now in the wheat market.
So as we're looking at kind of our time now in the current situation, you and I also were talking beforehand how our perception is that harvest is almost done or is done, but it's really not done in some places.
Yeah, surprising. For corn harvest in Kansas, it shows that we're 94% done. So it means about somewhere in Kansas, still 5% of the corn out there. Well, that's probably on some non-irrigated fields with, again, people that are still working their way through harvest. So about 6% unharvested. For grain sorghum, about 10% unharvested. And again, sorghum is a crop that well known for being slow to dry down in some situations. So we're actually ahead of the pace at 90% harvested. Normally we're at about 82%. So dry weather has helped us move along pretty quickly, but still it looks like about 10% of that crop's still out. Soybeans, that latest numbers as of November the 12th, 92% harvested, normally about 86%. For cotton, again, seasons work out that we harvest that later. Kansas, normally at this date, we'd be about 38% done harvesting with cotton, but we're at, again, November 12th numbers about 57%, and probably a little bit more than that now. It's been dry, not a lot of moisture, but still a ways to go on the cotton side. And in looking at where wheat stands right now, and that's a big issue, and that could be a big issue in the wheat market again if the Kansas wheat crop has major problems. But in terms of percent emerged, we're at, as of November the 12th, Kansas hard red winter wheat about 86% emerged, normally about 81, so about 5% ahead of normal, but the condition still struggles where the latest ratings are about 15% very poor, 18% poor, 36% fair. So we have emergence. It'd be nice to have moisture to get really good growth going, but the lack of moisture and the weather that we have has just put us in a kind of a risky situation in terms of the development of the wheat crop.
And Dan, rounding out our conversation, talking about the crop production report, which we touched on a little bit last week. However, now the market's had a little bit more time to digest it now.
as have we. In last week, was really concerned about ending stocks and what the crop production size for corn especially and for soybeans brought about. And when you stand back and look at the numbers more, if I had a question, I think a lot of ag producers that were a little bit surprised by the increase in yields for corn and soybeans that came about. They were thinking, gosh, that last part of the summer, hot temperatures probably really affected the size of the crop. You do look at what happened though, and in that November report, you did see an increase, let's say in Missouri, of about 4.3 bushels from the October to the November report, and that was, quote, ground zero in terms of where we thought the heat was affecting things, up to 147 bushels per acre for corn, Iowa 200 bushels per acre, Illinois 203. Kansas went down about, these are in terms of percents, about 0.8%, Nebraska down about 0.6%, unchanged in Oklahoma and Texas. So the fall off that we were going to see happening because of that hot, dry weather apparently did not materialize to the degree that people were thinking it was going to happen. And for soybeans, you saw in Iowa really no change from 58 bushels from October to November. Missouri, 45 bushels, 26 bushels in Kansas. That's for the soybean yield. Illinois, Indiana, both 61. Minnesota, 48. So that was the surprise, I guess, and that some of the stress that we thought was there that was going to hit those crops, if there's an impact not showing up yet. Of course, there's still at least two more time frames when if there was a problem, it could show, and there'll be the January report somewhere around the 10th to 12th, 9th, 10th, 12th or something. That's the final set of numbers. We start out early in the year. We make marginal adjustments to what our earlier projections were, and then we just have to wait and see how the stocks numbers, supply demand works out to really see where we finally have ended up at, to really prove the truth of our yield projections and crop production projections in the U.S. And sometimes that doesn't happen until about 9 to 12 months later.
That was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue our Friday show with a conversation with the person who is the keynote speaker at K-State Swine Day, Wayne Cast, who's a swine nutritionist. Wayne, thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for having me.
And Wayne, before we talk about kind of how you've seen the industry change from your perspective, could you give us a little bit of background about you?
I grew up in Nebraska, Beaver Crossing, Nebraska, so it's in the eastern third of Nebraska, and grew up on a diverse farm. We had pigs, we had cows, and we farmed, and I was the youngest of 7 children. And my first recollection as a child is coming down the stairs and my father having a box of baby pigs warming up by the stove. You know, we farrowed outside in huts, and it was a cold Nebraska night, and he brought those pigs in to warm them up.
Wayne, sounds like you were involved in the swine industry from a very young age. And so as you've progressed forward in your career to where we are now, kind of what are some changes you've seen within the swine industry?
My friend Dave Hamilton says, change is inevitable, growth is required, and misery is optional. I always like that line. But changes in the industry. Well, think about this. When I graduated from high school compared to last year we harvested 30 million more pigs in the United States with 2.4 million less sows. Wow. And that's sows is a misnomer. Actually, it's with a breeding herd, with the 2.4 million smaller breeding herd. And the reason I say breeding herd is because back then, when I graduated from high school, we had a lot of boars, and now boars have been kind of reduced in number greatly by AI. And then Steve Henry gave a presentation a few years ago, and he talked about in 1970 there were 680,000 pork producers, and now there's about 68,000. And so the industry has become more consolidated. And I worried about consolidation in that the industry's always been open and sharing, and if we got consolidated, would everything be a trade secret? Well, that hasn't happened. People are willing to share. People are willing to talk about their successes and their failures one thing I say a lot is smart people learn from their mistakes, but really smart people learn from other people's mistakes and also from their successes. And the pig has changed too in that length of time, in that the pig is putting down more lean muscle each day and using fewer pounds of feed to make that pound of muscle. So the diet needs to be more concentrated. In like 1984, for a 50-pound pig, needed to have 0.84 digestible lysine. Well, today, that diet probably has 1.3% digestible lysine. So the pig has changed. Our ingredients have changed. In 2000, there wasn't very much distillers around. But then in 2005, distillers plants were built everywhere. There's 200 and some ethanol plants in the United States, and each one of those produces a little different product. And so figuring out how to utilize those, that was a big change in our industry.
And how have you seen how pigs are being housed change?
Well, we moved from outside to inside, and so our sows and our grow-finished pigs it's our responsibility. It used to be we gave them a warm shed with bedding in it. Our job was pretty much done, but now the pig is sort of our captive, and we are responsible for making him comfortable. He used to be able to choose for himself, and now it's our responsibility to try to make him as comfortable as we possibly can. So that's a big change.
As a lot of things have already changed, what are a few things that you think are going to be big as we move forward?
This biofuels industry where our feed fats and our corn oil and our soy oil is going to be made into fuel for airplanes and for trucks. This biofuel industry is going to change. We're probably going to be feeding lower energy diets in the future because we're stripping the starch out to make ethanol. We're stripping the fat out to make biofuels. And so we're going to have to learn how to feed lower energy diets, and whether that means that we're going to have more feeder space or more floor space, or we're going to have to do a better job of making the pig comfortable in the hot months because of the heat increment of these higher fiber feeds. There's going to be a lot to learn there.
Wayne, what are a few things that you see are consistent in the swine industry, whether you have a handful of pigs or hundreds of pigs?
My brother's 18 years older than I am. I'm the youngest of 7. My brother's 18 years older than I am, and he's the only one that didn't go to college, and he's the one that made more money than the rest of us put together because he was a really good farmer and he worked hard. And when I was going to college, he said, what do you want to learn? I said, I want to learn everything there is about a pig. Everything I need to know about a pig. He said, well, keep them warm, dry, and out of the draft, and they'll do okay. And that is still true today.
And what are a few things that you see producers including in their diet for the pig that make you excited?
So when that growth of the distillers plants was very rapid. And so we ended up with lots of distillers, and we didn't know much about feeding those. And so learning how to successfully incorporate those into your diets offered producers big savings, and figuring how to do that. And we're still learning how to do that. Here in the last 5 years, we've learned about leucine-lysine ratio and how if that gets wider, we probably need to increase our isoleucine and increase our valine and possibly our tryptophan. So we're still learning about that. And then phytase, when it came out in 1995, there was one producer of phytase, and it didn't save you any money, but where it was adapted, if you were landlocked and didn't have enough acres to spread your manure on, and you were worried about phosphorus levels in your soils going up, phytase. But now it was a tool. But now there's 8 phytase suppliers, and it's saving $4 or $5 a ton if you don't have distillers. Phosphate costs have gone up because of this mess in the Ukraine, and so it's $4 or $5 a ton in a corn soy diet that it's saving. So that's a tool. And crystalline amino acids, we didn't have those when I first started doing nutrition, and so then the first one that came out was first two that came out was lysine and methionine. And if we just had those today, it saves you $4 or $5 a ton. But now we've also have crystalline threonine, tryptophan, valine, and you add up all those, it's $15 to $20 a ton. So realizing how to utilize crystalline amino acids has been a big change in our industry and a big tool. It's a useful tool.
And Wayne, before this interview, you mentioned something that your father used to say to you.
My father said that if you're willing to do something your neighbor won't do, or you're able to do something your neighbor can't do, there's usually some money in it. And he said pigs fall into both those categories because they're hard, dirty work, so some people aren't willing to do it. And they take a lot of management and stockmanship, and so some people aren't able to do it. And so my whole career, I've got to work with hard-working, talented people, and what a blessing that's been.
As you've spent your career in the swine industry, what makes you love it?
I think if I have been of value to the swine industry, it's because of the help I've received from others. The industry is willing to share. If you've got a question, you can find somebody that'll help you figure out the answer. You know, there's no limit to what I don't know, but I try to find somebody that does know, and I think that's the key to improving. Wayne Mashoff, I only met him one time, and it was 30 years ago, and he said this, and it stuck with me for 30 years. He said, 2 heads are better than one, even if one's a head of cabbage. So it's okay not to know, but it's not okay not to try to find out.
So now, as we look forward in the industry, what makes you excited?
I can remember when they would put up that our goal was to produce 30 pigs per sow per year, and I thought that was unrealistic because most of us were about 20, and I thought that was, wow, they're that. But there are herds that are achieving that now, and they talk about genetically we're even going to make more advances, and so I think knowing how the pig is changing, and then that we're going to have to learn more about nutrition and management to be successful with this higher producing animal.
And Wayne, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with producers?
Mark Twain said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that ain't exactly so." And so I take that to mean, to me, keep an open mind. You want to keep an open mind and be willing to change and willing to adapt. Gary Lewis, my friend, he says, we reserve the right to get smarter. So we're going to learn. We need to learn because the pig's changing, our feedstuffs are changing, the economics are changing. We got biofuels, we got ethanol. We got to adapt. We got to adapt and be nimble. And there's a book I read, and it's called The Farming Game, and it's written by Byron Jones. And you know how a caricature is a drawing that exaggerates a person's features? Well, this was sort of a written caricature. And the chapter on pigs was Harry the Hogman. And Harry the Hogman was always happy because he was making, when he was making money, he was making money. And if he was losing money, he knew that sometime in the future he'd be making a lot of money because of the hog cycle. So I hope Harry the Hogman's right, because we've gone through a long period of not very profitable times, and I hope we have a brighter future.
That was Wayne Cast, a swine nutritionist who was the keynote speaker at this year's K-State Swine Day. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll be joined by Chip Redmond for this week's weather update. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we finish our Friday show with a weather update with K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
What has the weather looked like this past week?
Yeah, it's been above normal and gorgeous, honestly. Temperatures have been in the 60s to low 70s all week, with the exception of yesterday and today. And just, you can't complain. We've had copious sun. It's been relatively dry, so we haven't had high humidity, not a lot of fog out there, and it's just been flat out gorgeous. Got to keep in mind, though, when we're 70 degrees, this is middle of November, and we average highs barely out of the 50s, so we're talking 15 to even 20 degrees above normal. In fact, if we had this kind of heat a week later, we probably would be setting some record warmth across the state, but rightfully so. It's not a week later, and we've just had a really nice week, and it's going to be hard for all of us to adjust to change.
And you mentioned dryness, and so has that impacted the drought monitor?
Yes, it has. Most of the state has not received rainfall so far in November. Most of central and east Kansas have gone 19, 20-ish days without wetting rain, at least a tenth of an inch. And you get further west, we're talking 40-plus days without a wetting rain and really dry conditions. So even with that rainfall we saw in the northern Flint Hills, the positive impacts are offset now, and we are trending drier everywhere, even in the Southwest where we've had above normal moisture for most of the year. As a result, drought's expanding. We increased abnormally dry in the Southwest, and kind of everywhere in some part of the state saw some sort of drought expansion, mostly just abnormally dry, moderate, and severe drought categories. We didn't see any change in the exceptional or extreme. But long-term drought continues. And way we've been with warmer temperatures, too, it's not helping things. Despite the growing season being over, we're still losing a lot of moisture due to evaporation due to the warmer conditions.
And are we going to continue to see these warm conditions next week?
Yeah, so we had a cold front come through on Thursday afternoon, and that brought cooler temperatures today. And really for the weekend, we're going to be about 10 degrees cooler than where we were. Then once you get to Sunday, we've got a big change coming as a pattern kind of breaks down finally. And we get definitely an El Nino type look to the weather pattern. We're going to bring some moisture in on Sunday into Monday. I think most folks won't get very much rain, unfortunately. I think probably north central has the best chance for a couple of tenths of an inch of rain. But with that comes cooler weather. We're going to be much cooler with highs in the 40s to maybe 50 degrees through most of the week. And then around Thanksgiving, it looks like the next substantial front comes through. And this one's going to have a little bit more of an Arctic connection. And we're going to finally see some below normal temperatures. And we're talking highs in the 30s, if we're lucky, for basically Black Friday through the following weekend. So much cooler weather's on the horizon. And with that, any moisture we get in that period, it looks like there might be a little bit of moisture Thursday into Friday. That could probably bring the potential for our first snowflakes for a lot of folks in the state of Kansas. We're way out in forecast model la land at this point, so things can flip-flop a little bit, but colder than normal. And if we throw a little moisture in there, we'll definitely see some snow showers.
With that cool weather, are we going to have some more wind?
Yes. We've had pretty negligible wind for the most part. Just looking at central Kansas, we've only had about 3 to 4 days this month that we exceeded an average wind speed for the day of 10 miles an hour. We should be that almost every day in November. So winds are going to really pick up with this storm system on Sunday into Monday. We'll see some gusts 40 to 50 miles an hour in the western part of the state. And then I think that'll expand across the state on Monday. Briefly, less wind on Tuesday and Wednesday before the winds pick up with that next system. So we're back into Kansas wind that we've been lucky to not have much of this fall.
Taking a look real quick at December, anything we should be expecting there?
Yeah, so this pattern change is definitely clouding things a little bit, what we'll see beyond next weekend into early December. And I think early December is going to probably drive a lot of the conditions for the rest of the month. Temperatures, I think, will even out. We'll end up being near normal for the month of December. Precipitation-wise, there's actually another system after this weekend, following weekend system, that could potentially lay down some decent moisture. But we're way out there right now. But that skewed the outlooks quite a bit, and they've added above normal precipitation for a lot of north and western parts of the state. I'm not so sure that's going to verify, so I think equal chances really of above or below normal, with a likely favor towards below normal just with that jet stream so far south now.
That was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. That's all we have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Monday.